All right, Georgi Dinkov, thank you so much. A pleasure to have you, man. To
Thanks for inviting
anybody
me.
who's not watching this for the first time because they searched for Georgi Dinkov, Georgi is uh, hands down one of the most astute people who's sort of following and championing this bioenergetic model, which I'm sure you've probably heard him or maybe Danny Roddy speak about in the past. And ever since I heard Georgie start talking about metabolism, especially coming from a sports background, I realized that he was really going to be a wealth of information in terms of maintaining the health of the individual in light of exercise or sports, because that was something that you struggled with. And if you want to take it right from there. So the question I had really is like, at what point, what was the turning point for you that was like, bioenergetics is a better explanation, is a better model? When did you really start adopting and buying into this?
When my health started falling apart. Basically, I was in high school. I was a power lifter, not so much bodybuilder, but mostly a power lifter, and I still maintain some of my bulk from high school. When I got to college, I started doing rowing because I'm originally from Bulgaria. Weightlifting is very heavily emphasized there. We used to have some of the best Olympic weightlifters in the world. We probably still do. But the endurance sports are not so well emphasized, not so much emphasized in Bulgaria. But when I came to the United States, in college, I found out it's mostly endurance type sports, right? There's basketball, there's football, there's rowing, there's track, field and track, right? There's cross country running, etc., etc. So I didn't have that many options, so I joined the crew team, which is essentially an endurance sport. Really grueling actually because it combines the intensity. You can think of it as a high, it's the type of HIIT exercise, right? High intensity interval training, except that it lasts much longer. I mean, you have usually two types of rowing events. One is a 2K event, 2,000 meters, and the other one is 6K. So the 2K event lasts between 5 and 6 minutes, and you're really rowing at a max power. You feel like you're about to pass out any second. And then there's the 6K event, which you're rowing at a slightly lower intensity, but this goes on for 20 to 30 minutes. So you expect it to maintain an 80% of the intensity of the 2K event, but it lasts for about 30 minutes. So that 6K run, that six not run, but that 6K event is, in my opinion, the most grueling exercise you can subject yourself to, short of an Ironman triathlon or anything. But I think these are just unhumanly gruesome. It's just unless this is your career or you really have something to prove. I just don't see what kind of a person in their sound mind is going to voluntarily join one of those exercises, one of those events. Anyway, so I rode for 3 years in college. I was relatively successful. We reached the finals on NCAA Division One in 1998. My boat placed second. So I was in fairly good shape endurance-wise. And when I graduated from college in 2003, I wanted to continue to maintain that I thought was a good physical shape. So the closest thing to rowing outside of college was running. So I picked up running, and I stayed with the endurance sports. I basically kept running 6 to 7 miles, 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes even 6 times a week. And this went on and on until about from 2003 until 2008, 2009. And I started getting these, strange symptoms. I was getting numbness in my extremities. I started having trouble sleeping, etc. And around the same time, I also stumbled upon the keto diet, and also decided to go low carb at the advice of my doctor, by the way, who said, "Oh yes, this is such a great thing. It's got a lot of promising research. I don't think this is that big of a deal." My primary care physician used to do research on ketogenic diets for treatment of epilepsy when he was in medical school. So he held the keto diet in very high esteem. So I said, try it out. So I went low carb, combined with my already surging symptoms of energetic deficiency, which I didn't know at the time that that's what they were. And for the next 6 months to about 12 months, I basically continued to do the exact same grueling schedule on top of my work as an IT security consultant, which was already grueling. 10-hour work days was the norm, usually 6 days a week. And then I kept running 6 to 7 miles, 4 to 5 times a week. And I also went low carb. I mean, needless to say, now looking back, this was really crazy, but it took about a year for me to fully collapse. And, just one night, I woke up in, it wasn't even a nightmare. It was just this absolute terrifying experience. I woke up and for about good 5 to 10 minutes, I didn't even know where I was. So I freaked out. I went to the doctor. I said, "Listen, I don't know what's going on. My extremities are numb. They go numb at night. They go numb randomly during the day. They tingle a lot." And the doctor said, it could be MS. So he sent me for an MRI. The MRI came back clean several times actually, and he said, "I don't know what to tell you. We cannot diagnose it as MS because you have to have the lesions in your spinal cord in your brain. And if you don't have those lesions, then we're going to call it like, I don't know, idiopathic, like mental or something." I said, "How can my extremities tingling be mental?" And he said, "Well, I'm not saying it's mental. I'm saying it could be, I forgot what the psychosomatic. Maybe because you're worrying too much about your health, you're bringing these symptoms upon yourself." It just immediately sounded like a lot of baloney to me. And I said, "This is crazy." He said, "Well, I mean, there's nothing I can do for you. If there's no structural damage that we can diagnose." And right then and there, I kind of realized just how powerless medicine really is unless you fit into one of their categories. So if you show up there and you have a, obviously easily diagnosable trauma or some kind of a structural damage, they'll immediately diagnose it, and then, they'll put you on the right track, which really means managing the symptoms. But if they can't do even that, then they're completely powerless, and all they do is they pass you around from one specialist to another, and every specialist is afraid of trying to do too much, something too invasive, because you may sue them, right? And many people do. So they just keep passing you around and hoping that over time your condition will either deteriorate and you're going to go to the ER, the emergency department, and they're usually pretty good at diagnosing, but they're going to put you through a battery of tests, a lot of radiation. They'll probably image you your whole body. They will not let you leave without a diagnosis. Or they'll hope, like the specialists hope that your condition will improve. It'll just stop bothering them. So for about after I collapsed, basically for about another 6 months, I just did not improve. And every doctor was telling me, "I don't know what to tell you, but we don't think it's physical. We don't think it's mental because as a part of my security clearance, I had to undergo psychiatric evaluations. Those came back clean, so to speak. I didn't have anything that the psychiatrist thought was worrisome or needed treatment. So they just kept shrugging and saying like, "I don't know what to tell you. Let's just give it another month." And this went on for at least 6 months. And then one day I was searching. I noticed that aspirin was relieving my symptoms. So one day I was searching about aspirin and inflammation, or aspirin and ATP, I think was the exact search. And then Dr. Pete's site came up. So, I read that article on aspirin brain cancer. I think that's how it actually titled, and immediately clicked. I just felt like, whatever this guy is saying, it makes sense for the first time ever, probably, but definitely makes a lot more sense than what my doctors were saying. And they weren't saying much. They were just saying, let's give it another month. Go see this other person. Then the other person says, like, "I don't know why they sent you to me. I don't think you need to be seeing me. Go see somebody else." And I immediately reintroduced carbs, and just like that, at least my sleep symptoms immediately disappeared overnight. Right? I was not able to sleep properly, and had that issue for at least 2-3 years prior to that. And overnight, just by reintroducing carbs, I was able to sleep without interruption, without waking up, without shivering, without having nightmares, without having to wake up and pee 3 to 4 times a night. All these things disappeared overnight. So the fact that the aspirin helped, the fact that the carbs helped, and these two things were explained so well how they work together in Dr. Pete's article, that's what kind of set me on this pathway. Needless to say, within a day, I had read already all of his articles, right? And a little bit of a background, like when I graduated from college in 2003, I graduated with a degree in computer science. But at the time, basically just after the dot-com crash, nobody wanted to touch people with a computer science degree. So I was forced to take a job as a bioinformatics specialist, which really meant a coder for software that deals with proteins and genes and whatnot, at a biochemical outfit called the National Biomedical Research Foundation. They're the ones who created a website called uniprop.org. It's a fairly large project. I was actually the developer of the backend search engine that to this day is used on their website. If you go to uniprop.org, you'll find out I was part of that group. I was one of three IT people, so, but the other 47 were all biochemists, MDs, PhDs, whatnot, but they're all biologists, biochemists, doctors. So between 2002, actually, in 2005, I worked with that group, and because I kind of got interested in what they do. I started going out with them to happy hours. I started getting involved in their work. So I started attending courses that these people were teaching at Georgetown University. So I basically had about 3 years of exposure to physiology, endocrinology, and biochemistry. So that's what gave me the background to be able to understand Dr. Pete's article, which I found in 2009, 2010 timeframe. But the reason, the background actually that not educational because I never actually had formal education in biochemistry, but the lingo, so to speak, I acquired the lingo by working with some really famous biochemists in the 2000 2005 period. So, anyways, back to Dr. Pete. Read all of his articles. Actually started cross-checking and verifying the references that he has in the articles. Started digging more into that idea. Found out about the book called Cold War in Biology. Then found out that there's an entire theory out there that's basically it's always been more or less suppressed. It's always was taking the second seat to the genetic theory, right? And then little by little, it became clear that even though we're told there is like a picture that's 100% correct and it's the correct way to do things, life is a lot more complex than that, and it doesn't. There's a huge field out there that's unexplored, and nobody wants to explore it, at least in the current medical industry. And it has to do with the biochemical energy, with the energy that our cells produce from food, using oxygen as essentially the acceptor of electrons. So you can think of us as internal combustion engines, and instead of gasoline, we actually burn food. But the process is really the same. We oxidize food, and in the process, we acquire energy and a lot of the raw materials to maintain our bodies. One of those raw materials being protein.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny listening to you talk. You were like, oh, well, my health declined. And then that was when I realized. And then, of course, your health declined, but then you went on the keto diet that further tanked your health.
Exactly.
And that totally mirrors my experience. And then I'm listening to you talk about the stress that you were under. And I got to say, it took a hell of a lot less stress to break me, because when I went low carb or zero carb for the first time, it took me about 6 months before I just had to stop and realize I had created a much bigger problem in my health than diet. Yeah. And I was noticing genuine structural deterioration, because I had been doing strength training for so long and basically had a grasp on what my energy and structure should feel like. And then 6 months into no sugar, it wasn't even no carb, it was just no sugar, but it was also low carb. And of course, my brain wasn't working very well.
There you go.
But at least I finally was able to realize that my structure and my energy had significantly deteriorated. Anyway, thanks for sharing all of that. So I think one of the coolest things about you right now is that you're doing your own research. So if you want to maybe plug some of the studies that you're most jazzed about right now, I'm very curious.
I reached out to a number of different labs because I realized that, I started getting into the Dr. P's work in the bioenergetic field around 2010, 2011. And most of that work initially was reading studies voraciously. I mean, I don't know how many tens of thousands of studies I must have gone through by now. But at some point you realize you're just rehashing other people's work. So there is no direct way to know, no matter how well a study is done. And Dr. Pete actually makes no secret of that many of these studies are biased. Many of these studies are actually flat out false. Many of these studies, the title and the abstract and the conclusions don't match at all the actual results. If you actually go and read the study and you're sitting there absolutely shocked and saying, hold on a second, this picture here shows that the compound you administered killed the mice with cancer quicker than the placebo. Yet you're concluding that there is no statistical difference. Are you kidding me? But so you over time you realize that the only access to truth is through experiment, to the actual ultimate truth. So at some point, if you want to verify some of those ideas in the bioenergetic field, you'll have to do the studies yourself. And one of the biggest criticisms that Dr. Pete endures all the time is that people say, how many studies has he done himself, right? It's all about discussing other people's work. Now, he's a genius at that, at a savant level, but the criticism always is, listen, you keep saying that the experiment is the ultimate source of knowledge. How many experiments have you actually performed yourself, right? So I said, okay, let me fill in that gap, at least for myself. So I reached out to a number of different labs, some of them in the United States, some of them in China, and some of them back in my home country, Bulgaria. And of all the places, ironically, even though the Chinese did offer the best pricing, uh, logistically, legally, and in general, just the whole bureaucracy of doing those things turned out to be the easiest. The combination of all of these factors, the easiest place turned out to be Bulgaria. I wanted to do things in the United States because it's closer. I thought I'll be able. There are plenty of labs in the DC region. I even reached out to some universities, but I found out that many of the people here, and not criticism to the United States because the same thing actually happened in Bulgaria and in China. Most of the people I reached out to, they weren't really interested in doing science. For the first question is who funds you, right? And I said, me. Really? That's really suspicious. How the hell can you fund yourself? This is insane. Like, where are your government grants? Where are your grants from big pharma? Like, who are you? Like, and oh, by the way, and you don't have degrees in biochemistry. We want nothing to do with you. It's probably some kind of Nigerian scam. No offense to the Nigerians, but like I was told a few times, like, are you from Nigeria? Is this one of these Nigerian prince things that we need to send you like 50K and then you're gonna give us back like 50 million? I said, no, none of that, right? I just want to conduct a study with rats and I want to test, let's say, pregnenolone, right? Or progesterone. Well, what do you want to test it for? Well, I don't know, a bunch of different conditions. Let's start with cancer. Oh, well, no, no, no. We can't really do that. I mean, so why would you want to test a female hormone for cancer? So, you immediately run into this wall where basically people you're offering to pay to do work, they keep telling you that's not how this is done. We don't want to do it. We don't want to get in trouble. And the only reason we will be willing to do that is if you pay a premium because number one, you're nobody in the biochemical field, and I admit it, right? You have no degrees, nobody has heard of you. Number two, it is highly suspicious, and take that for whatever that means. I don't even know what it means. It's highly suspicious that you fund your own work. And it makes it even more suspicious that you're trying to work with chemicals that we, the experts, believe will be completely ineffective for cancer. And you have these bizarre theories that progesterone has non-genomic effects which are connected to metabolic energy, and those non-genomic effects will have bigger impact on the health of the animal than the receptor theory that we're such big experts in. And I said, yeah, oh, you know what? Go to hell. We're not going to work with you. That I got told by at least 7 different labs in the United States to literally go to hell. One of them said, we will work with you if you pay a premium. And then the last one, I think, tried to do a background check on me because without me giving them any information, they clearly they can Google my name. They found out who my professors were, that I was working at the National Biomedical Research Foundation. So I started getting these emails and phone calls from my former professors and coworkers saying like, what did you do? Did you get in some kind of trouble? And I said, no, why? Well, we keep getting these really, really strange emails and calls from people who don't even know, who don't even want to say their names, right? They're saying, oh, I'm Dr. John. We're gonna keep it at first name basis on a first name basis here, and I want to know about your former student Georgie. So that one lab did a background check on me, but even they came back and said, yeah, it just doesn't add up. Like we don't want to we can't risk it. If you pay us a lot of money, we'll risk it. And I said, well, what's a lot of money? Oh, just to consider an experiment, even it's just like even with 10 rats, they wanted me to sign a contract for $50,000 paid up front, and sitting in not even in escrow. You paid in 50 grand that they get to use however they want to. It's sort of like a, I don't know, insurance policy or whatever. And then you start discussing things like they wanted me to hire a researcher on a full-term basis. So you have to pay a salary somewhere in the vicinity of 100 to $120,000 a year for a person to be dedicated to working with you. That's still, we haven't even gotten to the experiment. Then you have to add the cost of the animals, you have to add the cost of equipment, additional hours for bureaucracy, timekeeping, etc., etc. Basically, you're looking at a 250K a year for them to be willing to work with you. And I said, I'm sorry, I just, this is ridiculous. If I had 250K, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't retire, but I don't know, probably write a book or do something else. I wouldn't be necessarily trying to, do these studies myself. I'll hire somebody to do it. They said, well, that's what we're for. We are here for you to hire us, for us to do the work, and that's it. That's all. I said, well, I guess it's not working out for me either. Long story short, reach out to the Chinese. What is difference in culture? They actually had even more restrictive requirements that I had to basically divulge, submit to their background check, and then agree that every study will start with a disclaimer that this study is done for the ultimate glorification of the supreme minister of the Chinese Communist Party, some stuff like that, which I'm not even joking. That's what they said. Every study will have to have the disclaimer at the bottom, and you will have to say that even though you work in the United States, this is like an independent Bulgarian/European study, because they didn't want to publish something that would turn out to be sponsored by an American company, namely mine, right? And then last stop was in Bulgaria, and I hit some of the same obstacles there, but I managed to, one of my childhood friends, his mom works at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. She's now retired. So she put me in touch with some researchers there. They were just as suspicious as the Americans. I don't want to, I don't want to put the Americans down. They actually, it looks like it's like a cultural thing in that field, the biomedical field. People are very cautious. They don't want to risk their reputation, and they don't much care that you're actually going to pay them. But after about 6 months of wrestling, I did a study on the combination on our product, which is the name is Corinone, but it's basically a combination of progesterone and DHEA, and its effects on a very lethal leukemia in mice. So that was the first study we did. And then we did another study with our product Oxidal, which is a methylene blue based product. And a bunch of studies were done with that. One of them was the antiviral effects of methylene blue. And I think this is very, it's very timely considering the current pandemic. And researchers there were careful. They didn't say that methylene blue will directly cure the virus, but they did say that it has a universal antiviral effect because all viruses, all viral infections depend on the so-called cancer metabolism in order to take hold. The cell is usually almost immune to a viral infection if the cell is in a highly energetic state and produces energy through the oxidative phosphorylation pathway. So the only cells susceptible to a viral infection are the cells that are stuck in excessive glycolysis. In other words, overproducing lactic acid, also known as the Warburg effect. And cancer cells are the same way. So since methylene blue, at least temporarily, reverses that effect, the studies with Oxidal and in general methylene blue that the Bulgarians did show that it should be a universal remedy against any viral infection. They didn't go as far as to say COVID-19. They just said coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, Epstein-Barr, etc., but people can read between the lines. We have another study which is still ongoing. It's the combination of Oxidal, namely methylene blue, and another product which is a fatty acid oxidation inhibitor. We call it Pyroset. And again, it's for the same type of cancer, that lethal murine leukemia. And we're also synthesizing new chemicals similar to the drug meldonium, which many athletes know. It's a fatty acid oxidation inhibitor, and athletes use it for performance enhancing purposes. But through my research and Dr. Pete's writings, and in general, the publications that are available, there's a strong trail of evidence that shows, that demonstrates that cancer is actually a disease of excessive fat oxidation and not excessive glucose oxidation. In fact, cancer cells love oxidizing fat, which makes them waste the glucose and convert it to lactic acid because it cannot be metabolized. So ergo, inhibiting the fatty acid oxidation pathway seems to be highly therapeutic in cancer and many other diseases. And there's some publications about meldonium slash mildronate that are already demonstrating those effects. So what we did is with another group from one of the Bulgarian universities is trying to synthesize chemicals that work the same pathway as meldonium, but are about 50 to 100 times more potent and more and longer acting. So some of those chemicals are already synthesized and are right now undergoing both acute and chronic toxicity studies in mice. And the next step is to test them again on cancer. So really, I'm basically trying to verify some of the fundamental tenets of the bioenergetic theory, namely that the oxidation of fat is a universal stress signal from the environment, and that all kinds of diseases can prop up seemingly out of nowhere if you maintain this state of excessive fat oxidation for long enough. Conversely, if you inhibit the excessive fat oxidation, and keep in mind, we're not talking about completely blocking fat oxidation, because at rest, your muscles prefer to oxidize fat. But when this process goes out of hand and continues for too long, you're basically, through the Rendell cycle, you're blocking the oxidation of glucose. That glucose gets converted to lactic acid, and the Warburg effect, postulated more than 80 years ago by the double Nobel laureate Otto Warburg, turns out that the Warburg effect is also a cause. In other words, lactic acid is also something known as something called an oncometabolite. It actually causes cancer if the elevations of lactic acid continue for too long. In other words, the longer you continue oxidizing excessively fatty acids, the longer you're going to maintain the state of higher lactic acid. And the higher chance that some cells will basically start changing structurally, no genes involved and no need for a genetic change, that the cells will simply start dismantling their mitochondrial apparatus until the only thing that remains inside the cell is just a glycolysis mechanism. And that's really the cancer cell. That's all there is. So we're trying to reverse that process by blocking one of the pathways known to lead to it, which is the excessive oxidation of fat. Another pathway that leads to it, you can try to lower lactic acid directly. That's what methylene blue does. Another thing you can do is you can try to block serotonin, cortisol, estrogen, a number of these different mediators of the so-called stress field, which universally lead to deranged metabolism. And the characteristics of that deranged metabolism is the wastage of glucose. Instead of glucose getting converted to carbon dioxide and water and synthesizing ATP in the process through the highly efficient pathway of oxidative phosphorylation, the disease state is universally characterized by excessive glycolysis, through which you waste the glucose, you elevate lactic acid, and also characterized by excessive oxidation of fat. So any chemicals that are known to interfere with that sickness metabolism and or promote the healthiness metabolism, which is the proper oxidation of glucose, we're interested in, and we're going to synthesize some of them from scratch. Others are already existing. We're going to test them to verify, to confirm, to corroborate some of the statements of the bioenergetic theory and Dr. Pete's, right? And then we'll see where we are at the end.
That's fantastic, and I think you did a really good job in choosing. It's kind of a wise strategy to shoot right at cancer, and establish the premise that you're starting from, which is that cancer is a metabolic derangement rather than this, genetic thing. Also, it just comes to mind how you have, it's sort of like obesity and diabetes, then cancer in that order, as this cascade, where first you have the diabetic state where you're sugar wasting, and the diabetic, as I imagine I've heard you say, like they pee out sugar, their body wastes sugar, and then eventually that's the healthier adaptation, and then cancer arises, and that's when the cancer metabolism sort of takes over all of those calories that they're otherwise would be excreting. So we're talking about alternative health, and it's like there is health care and what the FDA approves, and then there's this big mess of a conversation, especially on the internet, about alternative health and what that may or may not entail. And so people have all sorts of crazy approaches and reasons why their supplement brand or their supplement approach or their detox protocol or their exercise routine is going to be the one. And if you start reading Ray's work, if you listen to you, if you listen to Danny, you've never heard about it, you'll be like, wow, these guys talk a lot about hormones, right? And that was one of the big things I noticed at first when I was listening to you. It's like, all right, this guy's really making a point for hormones being a point of focus that other people don't talk about. So could you give like an elevator pitch to why we should be thinking of the hormonal state and the endocrine function, and also like this idea that not just your endocrine glands secrete hormones, but that all your tissues can actually produce hormones themselves?
Yeah. So one of the first things that got me thinking about hormones is almost every person knows that the most popular type of cancer in women, breast cancer, and there's several subtypes of it. And medicine will tell you, oh, some of them respond to hormones, some of them are hormone dependent, some of them are hormone independent. None of that is true. There's already evidence that all of them are hormonally dependent. But the most popular subtype of breast cancer in women is the estrogen receptor positive one. So even mainstream medicine, known as allopathic medicine, admits freely and openly, yes, estrogen can cause breast cancer in menopausal women, and if it's already formed, estrogen can promote it. Conversely, if we're inhibiting estrogen synthesis or blocking the effects of estrogen at the receptor level, etc., it is highly therapeutic, and in fact, the estrogen receptor positive type of breast cancer is considered one of the most treatable ones because we now have drugs that are highly effective at almost completely obliterating the synthesis of estrogen through the so-called third generation aromatase inhibitors. They're most of them steroidal chemicals like exemestane, formestane, atomestane, etc. If you look at their structure, they're actually androgenic hormones, and they're suicidal aromatase inhibitors. And if you take them at sufficient dosages, basically your synthesis of estrogen will decline to almost zero. And they're known to be highly therapeutic. If the medicine doesn't want to use the word curative because they would want you for you to stay as a patient for life, right? But they're known to be curative for the estrogen receptor breast cancer. So I thought, what could be about estrogen that drives this estrogen receptor breast cancer? And if you look at some of the older publications, they were pretty open about the fact that estrogen stimulates cellular proliferation, estrogen stimulates the oxidation of fat, estrogen inhibits the oxidation of glucose, estrogen stimulates the synthesis of fat, even from glucose, right? So all of these things that are essentially the characteristics of the deranged metabolic state, that the first state is diabetic, right? And then eventually proceeds to fibrosis and then to cancer. It looks like estrogen is capable of starting, or at least turning on all of these light switches that are associated with a disease state, with a sickness state. And if you look, so if you start looking at some publications that talk about estrogen, especially the older ones, they're actually not shy about drawing parallels between estrogen and other hormones. In other words, what works like estrogen and what works unlike estrogen. In other words, in an opposite fashion. And it has been known since mainstream medicine since the 1950s that androgenic hormones work in ways opposite to estrogen. Progesterone works in pathways opposite to estrogen. However, cortisol, aldosterone, prolactin, serotonin, a number of other you can call mediators and or hormones or neurotransmitters, because prolactin and serotonin are technically, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, not necessarily a hormone. But if we think of hormone as a messenger substance, then all of them are hormones. And then older publications said, look, estrogen is really a mediator, a signal from the environment that things are not going well, that you're either starving, you're under stress, food is not abundant, temperature is low, you're living in some kind of a, I don't know, a very cold climate with a lot of snow. There's no easy availability of food. There's no easy availability really of sugar. Like it was the availability of sugar that older studies talked about, is availability of sugar to the cells. And if that availability is interfered with, one of the first things that kicks in is the so-called fight or flight response. But it turns out that it's not just, they explained that we developed that response in order to run away from a saber-toothed tiger back, like, I don't know, 4 million years ago. Well, it turns out that it can be triggered by just about anything. And one of the fundamental internal factors that trigger it is the unavailability of glucose, or somebody yelling at you, or you being afraid about something, right? There's this whole cascade called the hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis, and it starts with the brain, but actually It doesn't have to. There are things that promote the stress response further down. It starts in the hypothalamus, then it goes to the pituitary, and it goes through finally through the adrenal glands. But it doesn't have to be the whole three steps. There are things like estrogen that actually promote the synthesis of cortisol. In other words, the final mediator of stress. They promote the synthesis of cortisol at the adrenal level without actually triggering the brain pathways, such as the corticotropin releasing hormone and the adrenocorticotropin hormone released by the pituitary. So estrogen actually can fully trigger on the stress response without you mentally feeling like you're under stress. And it's really very aggravating for a lot of people because it creates this almost like a cognitive dissonance. You see that you're shaking, that you're agitated, but your brain is telling you that everything's fine. It can drive a lot of people literally crazy. So older publications were very open about estrogen not being a female hormone. They actually, the older name of estrogen was adipin. In other words, a hormone related to fat. And it was clear in those older publications, hence the name adipin, that estrogen was intimately involved in increasing the oxidation of fat, increasing lipolysis, so increasing the mobilization of already existing fat in your tissues and dumping into the bloodstream, and also increasing the synthesis of fats from food. So estrogen was really one of the master signals in the body telling you, look, things are not going well. We can, we should shut down everything that's non-essential, things like higher cognitive function, reproduction, creativity, really joy, like the good mood, the enjoyment of life, the hedonic aspect of life. Estrogen obliterates that in a matter of minutes because the organism says we cannot afford these luxuries right now. We need to worry about survival. And that's what really estrogen does through the activation of the fat metabolism and by suppressing simultaneously the glucose metabolism. And then again, if you look at the older publications, they try to class substances to put substances into classes slash groups, and they're saying, look, you think of estrogen as this unique hormone, but there are quite a few others that have very similar effects. Aldosterone, cortisol, prolactin, serotonin, growth hormone, right? Many of the inflammatory mediators synthesized from the polyunsaturated fats, they're actually highly estrogenic in nature themselves by being able to trigger the stress response, increase the oxidation of fat, increase the synthesis of fat, etc., etc. The prostaglandins and the leukotrienes are the biggest classes, and actually drugs that exist that block the effects of those or inhibit their synthesis, and they're highly therapeutic for almost any disease that they've been tried for, which suggests that there is a underlying generic systemic effect that relates to the production of energy and relates to inflammation and relates to the stress response, that estrogen is a part of the chemicals, of the substances, of the messengers that promote that response. And there are a number of different hormones that have the opposite effect, the most common ones being pregnenolone, progesterone, to a lesser degree, dihydroepiandrosterone, DHEA, and in males, especially testosterone, and ultimately, actually by far, dihydrotestosterone, which unfortunately medicine has created this myth about DHT, dihydrotestosterone, that it causes prostate cancer. But guess what? Actually, dihydrotestosterone is approved for treating prostate disease, not prostate cancer, but anything up to prostate cancer, in the vast majority of countries outside of the Western world. Even in some Western countries, such as France, if you go to a doctor and say, if you're a 60-year-old male, go to the doctor and say, like, look, I have trouble peeing, and the doctor confirms an enlarged prostate, very likely you'll get a prescription for a transdermal dihydrotestosterone gel. So that's why I got interested in hormones, because I see, aside from Dr. Pete's work, which focuses mostly on progesterone, that there are a number of these different hormones that basically either work together with estrogen or work against it. In other words, either promote the sickness field or oppose it.
Awesome. Yeah. So I visualized a couple months back that there's basically all of these hormones and then signaling molecules that work in concert together, and you just touched on them, that sort of are the characteristics of an organism moving in the wrong direction. And by wrong, I just mean towards, decay or lesser organization.
Yep.
So you have like adrenaline and estrogen or cortisol and estrogen, really kind of on two ends of the spectrum there, where you have estrogen, which is promoting growth, but in this disorganized way.
Yep.
right? So it helps you to accept energy from the environment, whatever energy is there, but in a disorganized way. And then you have cortisol, which will mobilize energy, but in a stressed and destructive way, right?
Yeah, and
And
from your own reserves, which is really not a good idea usually because, I mean, it's even mainstream doctors will tell you if your body is consuming itself, it's in general, it's not a good idea. But unfortunately, somehow the only doctors who know this are doctors who work in fields such as cancer, oncologists, because most cancer patients, known to all doctors that work in the field, they die from cachexia, which is the wasting syndrome. They don't really die directly from the actual cancer, very rarely, unless the cancer is pressing on some kind of vital organ, basically does something to the brain, ruptures an aneurysm or presses against the brain so the brain herniates. Rarely the patients die directly from the cancer. They either die from the wasting syndrome known as cachexia, or they usually die from the side effects of one of the chemotherapeutic drugs or radiation, which is either immunosuppression or multi-organ toxicity. So it's unfortunately it's only those doctors that know that your body consuming itself is not a good sign, and that's what cortisol does. It makes you consume yourself.
so, and you were getting into this, there is also the hormones and signaling molecules that characterize a state of health, a state of healthy growth, right? And a state of healthy energy. And I think it would be really cool to hear you sort of give a breakdown and specifically distinguish between the roles and functions of pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone,
Dihydro, yes, dihydrotestosterone.
and thyroid. Thyroid,
Yes.
of course, being the big one.
So the thyroid is kind of like the universal conductor. I think every cell in the body has a receptor for it. So in other words, every cell in the body is capable of responding to it, whether it's a deficiency or excess. So basically, if thyroid hormone is not there, very rarely it's too much. It's usually not sufficiently there, right? And without thyroid hormone, almost nothing else works. You will not be able to synthesize any of the other hormones, with the notable exception of cortisol and estrogen. The synthesis of those two is largely independent of the function of thyroid hormone, which is why hypothyroid people, at least in the early stages of hypothyroidism, tend to have elevated levels of cortisol and estrogen. And just to give you another example, older people in which there is, again, publicly admitted decline in metabolic rate, in the resting metabolic rate. Doctors know this. They're not going to dispute if you go and tell them an 80-year-old male has a lower resting metabolic rate than a 20-year-old male on average, right? But what doesn't decline in older people is the levels of cortisol and estrogen. What does decline is the levels of these other hormones, and they just happen to be in their function largely opposing to cortisol and estrogen and aldosterone, which is another stress hormone. It's the salt maintaining, the salt controlling hormone. So pregnenolone, being the precursor of all of the other steroids, including cortisol and estrogen, has a very basic structuring effect on the cell, and it makes the cell much less hydrophilic. And when the cell is less hydrophilic, just as I mentioned in regards to the viruses, the more the cell produces lactic acid, the more reduced the cell is, the higher its affinity for water, and the more substances it's going to take up from the bloodstream. So you'll be more susceptible to viruses, more susceptible to bacteria, more susceptible to toxins, and in general, the hormones of stress are themselves much more hydrophilic. And if you produce more of them, the cell's affinity for water will also increase. Conversely, the hormones that tend to be health promoting, they make the cell more hydrophobic. And pregnenolone is one of the most hydrophobic chemicals out there. It's almost impossible to dissolve in any solvent in a sufficient amount, which me as a company, we try to sell a liquid product based on it. I cannot tell you how many experiments I've performed with different solvents trying to find a one that will dissolve it. And conversely, just to show you how hydrophilic some of these others are, cortisol and estrogen, you can dissolve them even in water. and quite easily, actually, even though they're officially considered hydrophobic hormones, because of their multiple double bonds and hydroxyl groups, they have a much higher affinity for water. So when you're younger, your cells are in a hydrophobic state for a variety of reasons. First, the fat in your organism is largely saturated, and saturated fat is much more hydrophobic than unsaturated fat. again, due to the presence of double bonds in the unsaturated fat. Same with hormones. When you're younger, the levels of hormones that predominate in your cells is pregnenolone, progesterone, and then DHA starts to rise during puberty. But when you're in the age group between birth and the beginning of puberty, you're basically largely a machine for turning cholesterol into pregnenolone and progesterone. Not many people know, but boys and girls before puberty produce the exact same amount of these two hormones. They're not much different endocrinologically, the two sexes. It's only when puberty starts and kicks in, then basically a good portion of that pregnenolone and progesterone that males are producing, they start getting converted into testosterone and DHEA. And then in females, basically the levels of DHEA rise and also a little bit of estrogen. But the estrogen, the synthesis of estrogen is tightly controlled. Again, even though it's known as the female hormone, the estrogen levels in a healthy woman surge for only 2-3 days of the month during ovulation. Before and after that, it's the progesterone that predominates because the body itself has a very good knowledge of its own hormones and knows that estrogen is not something you want to allow to run amok because it can cause cancer quite easily. And now we're seeing a drastic increase in the rates of estrogen receptor positive cancers in girls that are even prepubertal. It was almost unheard of, and we're talking about rates 1 in a million to 1 in 10 million, to see an estrogen receptor positive breast cancer in a prepubertal girl. And now the rates are, let's say, 1 in 10,000. So we've increased that rate, those rates 100 times over the last 2-3 decades. And that's what it's largely due to the effects of estrogen and estrogenic molecules in the environment, such as the endocrine disruptors, the polyunsaturated fats, and stress. Now, I forgot to mention, I said like back in the old studies said that certain things work like estrogen, right? Like cortisol, prolactin, serotonin. What they also said is that all of these mediators of stress, it makes sense that if they work together, they also promote each other's synthesis. So basically, if your cortisol is high, it's going to increase estrogen, it's going to increase serotonin, it's going to increase prolactin. If estrogen is high for whatever reason, like you have an endocrine disruptor in your body, like too high levels, or you're eating too much PUFA, and estrogen rises as a result, cortisol, serotonin, prolactin, aldosterone, and others will also rise. They're really part of the. You have to think of them as a field. It's basically a signal, and every cell responds to different signals. That signal carries, it's mediated by a number of different mediators, and those are these stress promoting and stress carrying hormones, stress signaling hormones. Thyroid is the universal conductor which says everything's fine, the cell is producing, you should be producing sufficient energy. Many of the components of the oxidative phosphorylation metabolism depend on thyroid. So without thyroid, you're basically stuck in glycolysis. And when you're stuck in glycolysis, that itself is the signal to say, okay, we have to dismantle this expensive apparatus to perform oxidative phosphorylation. We have to revert back to the primitive metabolism, which is found in cancer, in bacteria, in amoeba, and all these primitive organisms exist as colonies, but without structure, just as you mentioned. 3 years ago, there was a study published in Nature, I think it was editorial opinion, and it said, we've been looking at cancer the wrong way. Cancer is not something that needs to be killed. Cancer is simply a sign that the organism has given up on the idea of maintaining structure and is trying to maximize chances of survival of individual cells at the expense of destroying the structure which makes us human, right? You take away the structure of the human that makes us human, and we're nothing but an aggregation of cells. We're not the slightest bit different from a colony of bacteria. So these hormones, pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, they all happen to work opposite to cortisol and opposite to estrogen. Many of them are actually directly antagonistic to cortisol and estrogen at the receptor level, which is the ultimate test that two hormones are really, really antagonistic. If they work in an opposite direction at the genome level, even in functional medicine, even in bioenergetic medicine, the admission is that these hormones have largely the opposite effects. And so it seems with these hormones. Bodybuilders, one of the reasons bodybuilders have such muscle hypertrophy is that they inject a lot of testosterone. They use other anabolic drugs, but the term anabolic turns out to be incorrect. Older studies have shown that about 80% of the so-called anabolic effect of these steroids is due to these steroids blocking the effects of cortisol at the receptor. So it's better to think of them, if cortisol is the ultimate catabolic hormone for muscle, bone, skin, etc., and these hormones, these other steroids block its effects, then they're actually anti-catabolic, right? So what we're seeing, instead of anabolic effect, we're seeing anti-catabolism. We're seeing the blockade of the effects, stress effects of cortisol, both on tissues and on the metabolic activities inside the cell. So pregnenolone has a direct, actually doesn't block directly cortisol at the receptor, but pregnenolone prevents, after cortisol binds with its receptor, pregnenolone prevents that receptor steroid complex from moving into the cell nucleus and triggering all of the cascades associated with the activation of the receptor by cortisol. So you can think of it as a silent antagonist. So I'm not going to prevent you from going on a date with your favorite person, but I'll prevent you from getting into the restaurant so you can complete the date, so to speak, right? Progesterone actually directly blocks the effects of estrogen at the receptor level, directly blocks the effects of cortisol at the receptor level, and also inhibits the enzyme aromatase, which is the enzyme responsible for synthesizing estrogen. Now, speaking of synthesis of all these hormones, if you talk to an endocrinologist, at least as far as women are concerned, every endocrinologist will tell you menopause is a condition which is characterized by estrogen deficiency. And that's complete and utter crap, because the enzyme aromatase is present in almost every cell around your body. So yes, if you take a blood test of a postmenopausal woman, you will find that the levels of estradiol, which is the steroid produced by the ovaries, is very low, undetectable. But also progesterone levels will be undetectable. So at the very least, we should be talking about menopause as a condition of both estrogen and progesterone deficiency. But guess what? Even though most other cells in the body have the enzyme aromatase, so they're capable of synthesizing estrogen, not many other cells in the body are capable of synthesizing progesterone. They just don't have the enzymatic machinery. The brain is one of the biggest synthesizers of progesterone. The skin is another, right? But still, if every cell in the body is capable of producing estrogen, and if with the age the hormones that restrict the production of estrogen decline, then aging can be viewed as a state of relative estrogen excess and deficiency in one or more of the steroids that oppose estrogen or inhibit its synthesis, namely pregnenolone, progesterone, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone. All of these actually happen to be aromatase inhibitors. By far the most potent is probably progesterone, followed by dihydrotestosterone, and then pregnenolone and testosterone are probably about equal. They're relatively weak aromatase inhibitors, but still there. And because you produce them when you're young and healthy, because you produce pregnenolone and testosterone, at least in males, in amounts much higher than estrogen, then this is sufficient to inhibit the enzyme aromatase to the point where your estrogen levels stay low where they should be, unless there is something that calls for the increase of estrogen, which is usually some kind of a trauma, some kind of a wound that needs this accelerated cell division and growth to fill in like a gaping wound. Yes, then you want estrogen to be high, but for a brief period of time, right? A week. Or you have a broken bone. Again, you want estrogen to be high, but for a week, at most a month. You do not want estrogen to be running unopposed, alone or together with any of the other stress mediators such as cortisol, prolactin, aldosterone, serotonin, growth hormone, etc. And endocrinologically, the hormones that restrict the effects of those stress hormones are pregnenolone, progesterone, and DHEA, testosterone and dihydrotestosterone in males. And guess what? Surprise, surprise. It's exactly the levels of those hormones that drastically decline with age. You pick any male or female over the age of 50, and you will find, and even the official ranges that are used by the testing labs to confirm that, you will see that the levels of those hormones are at best 30% of what used to be when you were, let's say, 25, which is considered largely to be the peak of youthfulness. It's actually not. You're already declining by the age of 25. The peak of healthiness is the age of 12. And the way you know that is you look at actuarial tables and you look at the chance of death, of all-cause mortality, and it's lowest at the age of 12. And then it starts rising. Actually, it rises a little bit. It starts declining after the age of 2. It rises between 0 and 2 a little bit, then starts dropping, continues to drop until the age of 12, and it starts rising, and it never flattens again until the very end. So it also, this decline, this increase in the all-cause mortality mimics almost oppositely, perfectly, the decline of these anti-stress health-promoting steroids such as pregnenolone, progesterone, and DHA in both sexes, and then testosterone and dihydrotestosterone in males.
Fantastic. So, and you got into this already a little bit. Basically, it's this matter of cell signaling physiology and the state of health and the state of disease. And I think that it's pretty obvious that when you're 12 and you're about to enter puberty, things are going pretty well. And then you enter puberty, and especially in the case of a young boy, you'll gain muscle really rapidly, right? If you do anything, basically, you'll gain muscle really rapidly. And I do think this is characteristic of being in that state of health, right? And so they don't really need to do a lot of strenuous exercise to do it. They can keep stress low relatively easily. So the question I have to you is then, how can we use these hormones as supplements to pull ourselves into that state of muscle building growth, right? Rather than the de-differentiated state of growth, a state of differentiated, health promoting, thyroid dominated, high energy, right?
Right. So I think it really depends on the health state of the individual. If you're still relatively healthy, you don't have a large amount of accumulated PUFA, which, by the way, when you're eating fat, the saturated fat gets preferentially oxidized, and it's the PUFA that gets stored. So almost any fat you're already carrying, unless you're making a conscious effort to eat a lot of saturated fat, for most people, any extra weight in the form of fat that they're carrying is going to be composed of polyunsaturated fats. And those polyunsaturated fats are not only acting like estrogen, they're also activating the enzyme aromatase in fat cells, and you're producing more estrogen. So an overweight person, assuming it's mostly fat, mostly PUFA, it's going to be producing a lot more estrogen. So the question is, what dosage and what hormone can be used to balance that effect and negate it, right? So it really depends on how much extra weight you're carrying and what's your estrogenic profile. What is your endocrinological profile? For somebody who is in their 50s or even older, I found through personal experience, even though I'm not 50 yet, but I know people who are 50 and they've tried a few different hormones. For them, pregnenolone and progesterone, they do have a very good effect, but it's mostly related to slimming down. So in other words, they're starting to lose the excess weight. But in terms of anabolism, in other words, starting to build muscle, for older people, it seems that some of the stronger androgens, such as testosterone or especially dihydrotestosterone, may be needed. And why one or the other? Well, I actually prefer dihydrotestosterone because, unlike testosterone, it cannot be converted to estrogen. And unlike testosterone, dihydrotestosterone itself is a much stronger aromatase inhibitor. So, anyways, what I'm trying to say is that for a relatively younger, healthier, leaner person, pregnenolone and progesterone and a little bit of DHEA can probably do the job of slimming you down and restoring that muscle building potential. But for people who are already with, let's say, like severely compromised health, really a lot of excessive weight, most of which is PUFA, I found that they often need to supplement a little bit with some of those stronger anabolic hormones such as testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. In the bodybuilding circles, they're even more, I don't want to say hardcore, but even more direct than that. If somebody wants to start a bodybuilding program and they carry a lot of extra weight, one of the common recommendations would be to do a cycle of using only the steroid trenbolone, which is one of the most potent synthetic anabolic androgenic hormones, and it happens to be also extremely effective at slimming people down. So it has the effect of making you lose all of that excess PUFA that is on your body. And after that, the bodybuilding gurus will tell you, okay, now you can go on a regular testosterone cycle and you can start building muscle, right? But even they tell you, even though they don't know it's about the PUFA, they know that the extra fat is interfering with the building of muscle by continuously synthesizing estrogen and by continuously upregulating the synthesis of cortisol, right? So you have to bring this under control. And bodybuilders are pretty direct. They're not that much about health as they are about looks, but they often coincide, and they will tell a novice, an overweight novice, to lose that extra fat, that gut that they have, right, that spare tire, and then they can talk about building muscle. I found out that larger doses of pregnenolone in the range of about 100 milligrams daily, combined with maybe 5 to 10 milligrams DHEA, can actually help an overweight older person slim down before they embark on a regimen of exercise. And once you lose that extra fat, that extra PUFA, you will find out that your hormonal profile, your endogenous hormonal profile, will change actually, because since cortisol and estrogen themselves suppress the synthesis of androgens endogenously and also of DHEA, if you lose all of that extra fat, all of that extra PUFA, if the levels of cortisol and estrogen decline, you will unleash at least partially the brakes on endogenous synthesis as well. So once you've slimmed down and lost most of the extra fat, the amount of pregnenolone, progesterone, and DHA you use can be drastically reduced. You can go down to basically supplementing with physiological levels, which for pregnenolone happen to be about 30 milligrams daily for both men and women. And for DHEA, assuming you still produce some of that yourself, even 5 milligrams a daily are usually sufficient. And then if the person has some other condition, such as especially fibrotic condition, which is the precursor to cancer, then higher doses of progesterone may be needed. And many people don't know this. Actually, most doctors that I've talked to don't know this. But up until the 70s, progesterone was known in medical circles as the most potent anti-fibrotomatogenic hormone available to medicine, endogenous or otherwise. And we're talking about bioidentical progesterone, not the synthetic progestins, most of which are actually derivatives of testosterone, actually most of them derivatives of nandrolone, which is a synthetic androgenic anabolic steroid, which bodybuilders use. And even though they act a little bit like progesterone, they're also estrogenic, and many of them are actually also cortisol promoters. So if you're talking about progesterone, I want to emphasize that we're talking about the bioidentical progesterone. So yes, for those people with some kind of fibrotic condition, cancer, Alzheimer's, any kind of a severe chronic degenerative disease, they may need to do a little bit of a progesterone, and sometimes even on the higher dosages, 100 milligrams a daily or more, for a month or two until they bring things under control, and then they can go back to a more benign schedule of physiological doses of pregnenolone, about 30 milligrams, and DHA about 5 milligrams daily.
That was gold. So basically, what you're talking about, rather than this, because anytime you talk about hormones and exercise, everyone immediately thinks of the bodybuilders who are bursting at the seams and they have that GH gut, as they call it, right?
Yeah.
Think about juicing and pushing the body to these unnatural extremes, and girls don't even like the looks of those guys. And really what we're talking about here is using hormones to specifically address the brakes on the state of health, the field of positive health that you may have accumulated through your life, whether through diet or stress or whatever. And it seems like the big one that you're pointing to is losing the weight first. That makes sense, especially if it's a bunch of PUFA. I didn't realize that pregnenolone could be so helpful in weight loss in older people. And I also am embarrassed to say I don't really know much of anything about trenbolone. But you're saying that it helps people lose weight rapidly.
Yeah.
If you lose a bunch of weight because you're taking trenbolone and a bunch of your fat stores were PUFAs, is that process, am I right in understanding that that process is going to be more or less stressful depending on the levels of PUFA in your fat?
Yes, and also depends on the level of lipolysis. That's why it's not a good idea to overstretch yourself initially when you're carrying a lot of extra fat, most of which is PUFA, because just as I said, since the saturated fat is preferentially oxidized when you eat it, but the PUFA is preferentially stored, the same thing happens, but in reverse during lipolysis, which is the shedding of fat. Then PUFA is preferentially released, while saturated fat is preferentially kept. And what happens is that at this point, there are quite a few publications that show that many of the organ damage issues that people with diabetes see, which diabetes itself being type 2 diabetes itself being a disease of fat excess and not glucose excess, right? They're wasting glucose. But at this point, there's extensive evidence demonstrating that it's the excessive lipolysis in those overweight people with type 2 diabetes that contributes to kidney failure and eventually even pancreatic failure, which can lead to either acute pancreatitis, which is often lethal, about 30% of the cases. But even if it's not lethal, eventually can either lead to chronic pancreatitis or pancreatic failure, which makes you a type 1 diabetic, right? Almost all of this is driven by the excessive lipolysis, the elevated levels of free fatty acids in the blood, and most of that fat being PUFA. So while you're carrying that extra weight, you should make sure that you're losing the proper weight, which is by supporting liver function, and then trying to maintain muscle mass, not build it because it will be stressful, but maintain the muscle mass that you have, which is done by keeping the effects of cortisol at bay. Pregnenolone, progesterone, DHA are good at that, right? So you're restoring the hormonal milieu, the hormonal environment that you had when you were 12, right? That's what these anti-stress hormones do. And then after you get back to that level, hormonal level of a 12-year-old, which means the liver will be working fine, the negative effects of the stress hormones will be properly opposed, right? Over time, as you're losing this excess fat through the process of glucuronidation in the liver and also by the muscles, whatever muscles you have left, oxidizing it at rest, and I stress at rest. That's why it's not a good idea to strain yourself, because then your muscles at strain, during strain, they prefer glucose, right? So you want them to be oxidizing the fat properly, which is at rest, and then the liver will be excreting a good portion of that, probably about 40% of that will be excreted by the liver by the process of glucuronidation, which makes the fatty acids water soluble, and then you'll be peeing them out. So you will have foamy urine. That's actually one of the good signs that you have had elevated levels of fatty acids in your blood. So you don't want this to be happening too much, because it means you're dumping too much fat into the bloodstream, right? And then it can overburden the liver. It can actually give you a liver failure. It's very common. It's very well known actually in medical circles that active athletes, they have elevated liver enzymes on blood tests after an exercise or after like an event. And one of the reasons is that basically you're flooding the liver with extra fat, and any fat that the liver cannot process, cannot glucuronidize and make it available for excretion, especially if the fat is PUFA, actually has a detrimental effect on the cells in the liver. Those cells start to burst and start to leak those hepatic enzymes into the bloodstream. So that's how they get detected by tests. The ALT, the AST, the ASP, and the GGT, these four enzymes associated with liver function, well, actually that are used to detect liver injury, they rise in your body after a strenuous exercise because of that fat damaging the liver. So I don't want to say lie down all the time, right? I mean, do a decent walk. You can carry some weights, right? But if you start feeling like you're starting to, if you're gasping for breath, if you can't really maintain a conversation on like a steady conversation while you're carrying out the physical activity, means you're overburdening yourself. So you can even run. But again, the test is, can you maintain a normal conversation with another human being while you're doing that, whatever physical exercise, whatever physical exertion you are? If yes, then you probably, you're at a good stage. Your liver is not overburdened. Your muscles are capable of oxidizing and handling the fat, which means they're producing carbon dioxide, which allows you to breathe properly and not gasp for breath, right? The moment you start gasping for breath, the moment you start feeling burning in your muscles and tissues, means lactic acid is high, carbon dioxide is dropping, fats are taking over, and because of the Rendell cycle, basically too much fat and not enough glucose oxidation, and that's not a good sign. So you need to scale down. And over a period of a few months, if you restore the hormonal profile, you keep the stress hormones at bay, you will be losing that extra weight the proper way through oxidation and glucuronidation. And then after that, after your hormonal profile is restored to a more youthful level, you will find out that you will be able to build muscle with a lot lower intensity of a physical exertion. I want to give an example that chimpanzees that are known to be 2 to 3 times stronger than an adult bodybuilder, and are actually, they don't lift weights, and actually they don't climb trees that much either, unless they're hunting or trying to get food. They spend most of their days, most of their day and nights in a sedentary position. Yet recently, you can go to Google and verify it. Type burly chimps in Google and go to Google Images, and you'll see that some researchers actually shaved the fur of the chimpanzees completely, and you'll see that the chimpanzees are ripped. They look like miniature bodybuilders, and they're ridiculously strong without without lifting weights, without pumping iron all the time, and without juicing. More importantly, right? So they are in a hormonal milieu which naturally allows for their bodies to build muscle and keep the accumulation of fat at bay without most of these interventions. But we do need them because actually the life of a chimp, ironically, is a lot less stressful than ours is, and a lot less toxic, and probably a lot more interesting, I have to say.
Yeah, fantastic. So in addressing the fat first as this disruptor, endocrine disruptor, then maybe we can get into how having more muscle is protective. And if it is, how do we get more muscle? Say we're already thin enough, right? How do we put on more muscle without causing unnecessary stress to the system?
Right. So a couple of things. First of all, having more muscle is highly positive, is highly helpful. And in fact, every single study that has looked at that phenomena has found that all-cause mortality is almost perfectly inversely correlated with the amount of fat-free mass a person carries. So in other words, their muscle mass. Why? Well, one explanation is that the amount of muscle you carry, muscle is much more metabolically active than fat tissue. Fat tissue actually is very good at storing additional fat, but it's not very good at metabolizing it. While muscle is, and in fact, at rest, muscles prefer to burn fat, which means the more muscle you have, the more fat you'll burn from the diet that you're eating or from the reserves that you have without actually you doing much, right? All you have to do is maintain that muscle mass so that you allow it to burn that extra fat. Now, what happens if you're already thin? Well, if you're already thin, then the way to start building more muscle is by ensuring that you have a sufficient protein intake. And most people don't know it, but they're actually in a state of relative protein deficiency. And these are studies published by the FDA. Even though even FDA itself recommends 1 gram per kilogram of body weight of protein intake daily. And the FDA's own estimates are that most people are actually getting between half a gram to 3/4 of a gram per kilo daily. And if you're not getting enough protein, you will be in a state of both chronic catabolism because the body actually needs amino acids and it will get them from your muscles or from your skin or from your organs, especially if you're under stress, because then the body needs glucose, which leads me to the other thing is make sure you get sufficient glucose, because if you don't, then the body will get the glucose that it needs by shredding your muscle and converting it into glucose through the process of gluconeogenesis. And so basically make sure you eat a sufficient amount of carbs, but make sure those are the carbs that are easily metabolized and not the resistant carbs that end up in your colon, feed the bacteria there, and create a chronic low-grade endotoxemic inflammatory reaction, which is now known to be behind many, if not most, of the chronic degenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's and even cancer. So, and cardiovascular disease, almost anything can be traced back down to chronic inflammation, which in most cases is driven by either endotoxin or PUFA or both. So if you're already thin, make sure you eat sufficient protein. Also, make sure that the protein is as low as possible on the pro-inflammatory amino acids such as cysteine, methionine, and tryptophan. And since most people, it's really becomes like a very involved exercise to constantly keep track of all that protein that you're eating, which amino acid it's high on, which amino acid is low on. Some things that you can do to inhibit the effects or even the absorption of these inflammatory amino acids in the protein is taking a little bit of aspirin. Aspirin inhibits the absorption from the GI tract of cysteine, methionine, and tryptophan. In addition, you can, if you've already ingested those inflammatory amino acids, you can to a large degree negate some of their inflammatory effects by taking again aspirin after you've already eaten, or eating more gelatin, because the amino acids in gelatin, especially glycine and proline, are highly anti-inflammatory. In fact, glycine is now used clinically as treatment for inflammatory conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis in some countries that cannot afford to buy the expensive drugs like Humira. And also, it happens to be the glycine happens to be a lot less risky, a lot less dangerous than all of these immunosuppressive drugs. Why is it important to not overconsume the inflammatory amino acids? Well, inflammation, as any bodybuilder will tell you, is bad for muscle. If inflammation is high, cortisol will be high. The two main functions of cortisol in the body is maintain proper levels of blood glucose because your brain needs it, and number two, keep inflammation at bay. The lower the endogenous inflammation is, the lower the need for synthesizing extra cortisol. And cortisol is the catabolic hormone. Bodybuilders go to great lengths to block the effects of cortisol. Just as I said, most of the actual anabolic steroids are at their core anti-cortisol steroids. So keep inflammation low. So this means eat less of the inflammatory amino acids and eat more of the anti-inflammatory amino acids such as glycine. Keep sugar intake. You don't have to go crazy on it, but the ratio of glucose to carbs should be at least 1 to 1. Because if it's not, then because of the effect of the amino acids on triggering insulin release, you will cause a hypoglycemic reaction, which then has a cortisol rebound reaction, a counter reaction, because as I said, the body will do everything possible to keep blood glucose from falling because you can go into a coma. Your brain depends absolutely vitally on glucose. So keep inflammation at bay, keep cortisol at bay, keep stress at bay, make sure you eat sufficient high quality, low inflammatory protein. And if you cannot do one or more of these things, then at least supplement with the anti-inflammatory mediators such as aspirin and gelatin. And by the way, all the steroids we mentioned earlier, especially pregnenolone and progesterone, are highly anti-inflammatory themselves. So those can actually not only have an anti-catabolic effect because they're opposing cortisol, but they're also opposing and inhibiting the inflammation, which may be very well may be the top step, which is responsible for the excessive cortisol release anyways.
Love it. Yeah, it's sort of like when you give your body all of the right things, it can keep everything in its right place.
Exactly.
Where sugar is the fuel and protein is the structure. I'm chuckling here because I'm thinking about all the time that I spent trying so hard to lift weights and work out when I was doing carnivore, and I would be absolutely tired. I would need minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes in between my sets. And then I would finally get to the end of my workout, pull myself out of this hypometabolic slump and cook myself a big platter of meat and no carbs. And I would eat this big platter of meat, probably loaded with PUFA. And then I became so habituated to just feeling awful and totally hypoglycemic afterwards. And of course, now I'm smiling because I'm happy to, be downing milk and maple syrup. That's my favorite right now. A whole bunch of maple syrup with a couple, like maybe a cup and a half of milk. It's awesome.
So couple of things that I'll add to that. So why the carnivore diet usually not, it may work initially, but why eventually does not work for bodybuilding? First, without the carbs, a good portion of that extra protein you're eating will get converted to glucose because the body can only utilize, and that's probably a good thing to mention here, the optimal dosage of protein per portion is no more than 30 grams. Anything more than that will get deaminated, and I emphasize the word deaminated, which means the amino acids will have their amino group stripped and turn into ammonia. So if you're overdoing the protein, you will be in a state of hyperammonemia, which is not only highly toxic for your brain, but one of the primary effects of that is chronic fatigue. And there are actually drugs on the market that bodybuilders and now actually athletes are starting to abuse, parentheses, abuse, right? And those drugs help you excrete the ammonia more efficiently or chelate it. And it's been shown that these drugs improve cognitive function, improve sleep, improve athletic performance, precisely because ammonia is such a toxic molecule for almost any cell in the body. Now, yes.
Isn't that where Ray would plug the raw potato juice?
Exactly. So one way to do it is to eat precursors of amino acids that don't contain the ammonia. So they contain the backbone, and since you already, most people have more than enough ammonia in their bodies due to the normal catabolic processes of the day, and we actually have more of those because we're under stress, right? So you're gonna have plenty of ammonia. And when you eat the precursors known as keto acids, they combine with ammonia and then they form this protein that you can use for building tissues while also having the huge benefit of lowering your ammonia in the process. So that's actually a highly ergogenic meal would be to either drink the, eat the cooked potato juice, right? Or if you can, but they're very expensive, buy the keto acids separately and make a protein shake with those. Now, another reason why having a sufficient amount of carbs is very important. The muscles responsible for that are allowing you to lift those heavy weights are the so-called white muscle fibers. They're the ones that grow in response to lifting weights, and they're the ones responsible for the explosive production of force. And those are glycolytic. In other words, they depend on glucose. The other ones that are more highly expressed in endurance athletes are the red fibers, and they actually prefer to burn fat. So if you're not giving yourself enough glucose, you'll be forcing yourself to lift you'll be trying to produce explosive power from the red fibers, and they're not actually designed to do that. While at the same time, you're not only starving the white fibers, but you're also overexerting them because you're trying to make yourself to lift that heavy weight without giving those fibers the fuel. So you'll achieve probably nothing and may even hurt yourself if you're lifting weights but not providing the fast fuel, which is carbs, which is what the muscle fibers that respond to weightlifting really need in order for you to properly build those muscles. Now, if you're running marathons, then you probably, you can still benefit from glucose, but the red fibers will be just as happy from consuming fats, right? So, but if you're lifting weights, having glucose is important. Having no more than 30 grams of protein per serving is also important, unless you're a very heavy person, let's say 300 pounds. If you're a linebacker, you can probably afford to eat like 50 grams of protein per serving. But if you're, an average-sized person, even if you're very tall, probably up to 30 grams is sufficient. And make sure that it also goes with carbs in a ratio of at least 1 to 1, preferably 2 to 1 in the favor of carbs. That's really the way a bodybuilder, a weightlifter, protein shake should look like. And it just so happens, recent studies found that chocolate milk is the best meal, the best post and pre-workout protein shake, and beat by a large margin many of the other synthetic ones that are at least 10 times more expensive and advertised by a bunch of very famous athletes. But milk has the good ratio, has a decent protein. It's anti-inflammatory due to the amount of calcium it has in it, and it has an amount of carbs that is at a good ratio of about 1.5 to 2 to 1 in regards to the protein.
Awesome. So I think this will be the last question on weightlifting. Basically, muscles in a high state of energy are using glycogen, right? Like you were talking about. And I think that's really what we're going for, is to be able to cultivate the peaks of our metabolism to be higher, right? When we get an epiphany, when we're working on a piece of writing or a podcast or whatever, we have this burst of energy that's fueled by glucose, right? And by training in that way, we can increase the metabolism to sustain that, right? So in order to build a muscle, you need to sufficiently stress it in this high energy state, right? And of course, the key word is stress. So my background has always been in high intensity but low volume, and also without an emphasis on the compound lifts, but rather on using machines in order to efficiently tax the specific muscle so that it gets the stimulus and the signal to grow. What do you think of that?
I think that's a very good approach. So there's a term called lactate bound exercise. In other words, you stress the muscle. I don't like the word stress. It's actually you challenge the muscle to the point where it starts to it's starving for energy, and basically it's not consuming enough oxygen, and without the sufficient oxygen consumption, it's starting to waste the glucose into lactic acid. With that threshold right there is about the maximum you should be exerting yourself systemically. And different muscle groups have different thresholds, right? So you need to find out what the different threshold for each muscle is and work up to that level. And then you stop, right? You allow it to recover. If needed, you'll drink something sweet if needed. If you feel like your glycogen stores are being depleted, and they happen to be more depleted in people with liver problems, which now are rampant. Apparently, 2/3 of Americans have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or something worse, right? If you're drinking alcohol, if you're doing all of these things, you'll probably be you'll be depleting your glycogen much faster than you want to. But yeah, so as soon as you start feeling that burn, that means you already started to overproduce lactic acid. And there's some things you can do to actually limit the amount of lactic acid being produced, which allows for more carbon dioxide to be produced. And the carbon dioxide is the primary stimulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. The more mitochondria you have, the more efficiently you'll burn all these calories, the healthier you'll be. And cognitive function is now known to depend entirely on the number and density, the size and density of the mitochondria in your brain cells. And if carbon dioxide is the ultimate, if one of the, well, I said not called the ultimate endogenous mediator of creating your mitochondria, then you want to stay at the level where carbon dioxide is high. And since carbon dioxide and lactate are inversely correlated, which means you want to stay at the level of intensity that keeps lactic acid at bay.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So basically what I'm talking about is doing something, where you distribute the systemic stress by only taxing a certain muscle group at a time, right? And keeping volume to a minimum. So the overall burden on your blood sugar and your systemic stress is as low as possible, allowing for proper recovery, not working out every day, maybe even if 2 days off or 3 days off in between to allow the muscles to rebuild themselves. And yes, challenge is a better word.
Yeah, and actually, as a confirmation of your of that approach, you find out that people who are sick, old, or in general energetically compromised, they'll have a very difficult time doing core exercises because those engage the entire body, right? So they actually, and they prefer themselves. If you work with a very overweight or sick person, very often you will see that all they want to do is do like bicep curls with like small dumbbells, right? They do not want to do bench press. They don't want to do squats. It's simply because it taxes them too much. It's because it involves the entire organism. And if the entire organism is, on average, under a stress compromised condition, that exercise is actually not good for them. But if certain muscle groups are stronger, right, and if they can isolate them better and stress them properly, or not stress challenge them properly, right, they themselves feel that this is better for them. And you will find that out by actually, when you try to push them, they'll say, I don't want to do squats. I can't do squats. I'll do bicep curls, I'll do triceps extension or whatever they're called. I don't want to do squats. I don't want to do like kettlebells. I don't want to be jumping up and down, if they find their strong muscle group, they'll be willing to really, really push that muscle group. But they'll stay away from the core exercise, and you will see as their condition improves, they'll become more and more inclined to do core exercises that involve the entire body.
Well, it's also funny, and of course, the first thing that really comes to mind, though, is the image of the person who doesn't really lift weights, and they want to lift weights, and they don't have a trainer or whatever, and they're doing the bicep curls, and their gut is sticking out. Yep. And all I think is endotoxin.
Exactly.
Because even if you're weak, if you don't have a lot of endotoxin, you'll probably be just fine squatting or deadlifting or whatever. But the moment you have a bunch of inflammation going on in there, putting pressure on it, that increasing the intra-abdominal pressure is the last thing the organism would
exactly do. Exactly. Yep.
Georgi, I got to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to hit you with these rapid fire. The end here. If you had to pick, what would be the most common and devastating high damage pro-estrogenic activity, substance, or pollutant?
In terms of pollutant, I would say the endocrine disruptors from plastics, such as BPA, BPS. Now they've started to replace BPA with BPS because EPA and FDA said, oh, we're finally recognizing that BPA is estrogenic, anti-thyroid, anti-androgenic, etc. And the industry said, oh, no problem. We're going to replace it with something even more toxic. But we're checking the box. It's not BPA, right? So stay away from plastics as much as you can. Stay away from store receipts, which, by the way, have more BPA per square inch. Actually, I think up to 15 times more than plastics, because at least the one in plastics is usually bound. The plastic has to leach which usually happens at high temperature, and basically, or the plastic is being damaged somehow. But the receipts, just by rubbing your fingers on them, or like, folding them and unfolding them, that's already enough to release a lot of those on your skin, and they stay there and absorb. So in terms of a toxin in the environment, I would say that, plus of course the polyunsaturated fats in food will be my two top, because they're so pervasive, right? It's not just about intensity of the toxicity, it's about how common it is. So if it's something like radiation, ionizing radiation, that you're, very, very dangerous, probably the most dangerous thing you can do to your body systemically, but you only get an X-ray once a year, compared to a PUFA exposure or an endocrine disruptor exposure that you're getting literally constantly 24/7, I would pick that the latter. I would say that the latter is much more dangerous cumulatively. Another thing that ranks right up there is non-ionizing radiation. Even though now people will tell you, doctors will say, "Oh, don't worry, it doesn't cause cancer." The National Institutes of Health, commissioned by the Federal Drug Administration, by the Food and Drug Administration, released a report 2 years ago which classified EMF, non-ionizing radiation, as a probable, not possible, probable human carcinogen. So all of the stock that you see on social media of experts debunking the fear mongering about EMF, about Wi-Fi, about your cell phone, well, even now the government and its agencies, as corrupt and blind as they are saying you should really be cognizant of like what of this field, this sea of electromagnetic waves you're bathing in. So turn off the Wi-Fi router at night. If you don't use it, right, you'll see that you'll likely improve your sleep. Stay away from like electrical outlets. Like don't sleep close to the microwave, even if it's not on. It's actually always on. It's just the amount of waves that it produces. It's got wires, so it has a field, right? So yeah, things like that. And then also really routine activity of any kind is so extremely serotonergic and so damaging to your brain, that it has a very, very, very long-lasting impact that is very pernicious, because it's hard to narrow down, right? It's hard to nail down. And if you go to your doctor with some kind of a disease years later, and everything seems to have been going fine in your life, the doctor actually never asks you, did you work a menial job where you basically were a pencil pusher, and nothing was interesting, and you were just doing your job, as they say, and you collected a paycheck and you went home? And if the answer is yes, that's actually such a powerful brain toxin that it rivals the effects of EMF and PUFA and the endocrine disruptors, precisely because most of us are not conditioned to think of that as a toxin. We think it's perfectly fine. We're getting paid, so in return, we are selling our freedom or our creativity or our ability to do interesting, meaningful things. Guess what? That has a direct impact on your health. Why? Because the brain is the master controller of metabolism in every cell of the body, and it also consumes 40% of your calories. So if you're doing some kind of a really boring and meaningless and soul-sucking job, you are very directly damaging your metabolism, and your systemic health.
So, thank you. Those were basically what I thought you might mention. And really quick on the EMF one, before I even discovered Ray, I was looking into EMFs, and it seems like the most concrete evidence is all about the voltage-gated calcium channels,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so because the electronic signaling in the cell in the body is so subtle, everything that we're using ever since 2G has blown our VGCCs wide open, right?
Yep.
And once I started listening to Ray, and he has this huge emphasis on calcium, it took me a moment to reconcile how it's the fact that in a highly excited state, the VGCC is triggered, and then calcium enters the cell where it's not supposed to be, whereas calcium is supposed to be outside of the cell. Exactly. So I feel like that seems like it's as direct as could be in terms of estrogenic effects, right?
Yeah. Also, it's the cell will open more of its calcium channels if it perceives a relative deficiency in calcium, which the cell itself, the signal that the cell gets that there's a calcium deficiency is the elevation of the parathyroid hormone. So if you're eating sufficient calcium and your vitamin D levels are proper, the parathyroid hormone levels will go down, and that will be a signal for the cell that it should not let that much calcium in, that it has plenty of calcium, that the organism has plenty of calcium, and it'll be much more resilient to opening those calcium channels even basically at the under the influence of EMF. But even if you want to protect yourself, if really under a very strong field, there's no avoiding it, then things like calcium channel blockers, any calcium channel blocker would do. Magnesium being the primary endogenous natural one, right? But there are plenty of drugs that are sold as calcium channel blockers because they've also been found to be very beneficial for treating heart conditions and neurological conditions and blood pressure. So any of those calcium channel blockers would do. And selenium, which was found that in animal studies that through an unknown mechanism, selenium was capable of fully reversing the detrimental effect on the reproductive, the neurological, and the hepatic system, which was triggered by regular exposure to the equivalent of sleeping 3 feet away from a Wi-Fi router for just a few hours a day. That's how the animals were exposed. So eating sufficient seafood and make sure, but because that's the richest source of selenium, it's probably the best way, the best source of selenium. But make sure you don't eat the fatty fish like salmon. Make sure you eat like lean fish like cod, right? Tuna is probably not bad either. You're eating oysters, you're eating shrimp, octopus is fine too, squid is fine. Those are very rich sources of selenium, and selenium seems to be highly protective against the systemic detrimental effects of EMF.
Love it. Love it. All right. So this is actually the last one. Aside from the hormones, what would be in Georgi Dinkov's bulk up, get, put on mass supplement stack? What would you put in there?
I would say glycine. There was a recent study that showed that when they were feeding older animals, the age equivalent of a 45-year-old or older, they were feeding rats protein. And then it's well known in sports medicine that the anabolic response to protein, that's what they call it actually, rapidly declines with age. And then if you're giving an 80-year-old person 30 grams of protein, they will elicit only about 20% of muscle protein synthesis increase compared to the muscle protein synthesis response of a 20-year-old to the same protein dosage. So they didn't know why, and they tested a few. They had a hunch that inflammation was involved, and they fed the animals just a few grams of glycine, the human equivalent of a few grams of glycine, together with that protein, and found out that the muscle protein MPS rate of the older animal, even extremely old, about to die, actually shot up to the level of about 85 to 90% of the rate of the younger animal. So inflammation is key to both maintaining muscle mass and also if you want to build it, then keeping inflammation at bay, which means aspirin is probably a great one because aspirin itself actually has an anti-cortisol and an anti-estrogen effect. It has a pro-metabolic effect. It has an anti-calcium toxicity effect. It has a bunch of different effects that go hand in hand with maintaining muscle mass. And other things that inhibit cortisol synthesis. I think the Cascara sagrada is a good one because emodin, the principal component of Cascara sagrada, is the most potent, both natural and synthetic chemical discovered so far, known to inhibit the synthesis of cortisol by blocking the enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1. In addition, being a quinone, it also activates the other enzyme which degrades cortisol, which is known as 11-beta HSD type 2. So emodin has this perfect package where it inhibits the synthesis of cortisol and increases the rate of its degradation. And speaking of which, almost any other quinone, including methylene blue or vitamin K, is actually really good. And recent studies show that a combination of vitamin D and K has the potential of acting as a doping agent because it has such a powerful anabolic effects. Some of these effects have already been confirmed in studies. Vitamin D is itself a steroid, so maybe it doesn't exactly answer your question because aside from steroids, right? But vitamin K is a quinone. So vitamin K has been shown that in sufficiently high doses, it triggers the synthesis of testosterone in the gonads of older males that exceed 4 times the synthesis rate of testosterone in younger males, right? So it has an anti-inflammatory and a pro-metabolic effect, being a quinone itself, that has a very pro-androgenic, pro-anabolic, anti-catabolic effect that very few vitamins actually can meet. I don't know of any other vitamin that can match that effect of vitamin K on both the muscle system, and vitamin K already has a known effect on the skeletal system which is for that is already approved as a drug for treating osteoporosis in Japan and many other Asian countries. And it just so happens that highly virile, highly men with really good health also happen to have very thick bones, very good bone health. Thinning of the bones is actually one of the first signs of impending disease. Even before muscle loss starts, you can start seeing like these people's limbs are getting thinner, and a lot of it is due to the thinning of the bones. So vitamin K not only directly opposes that effect, but it can actually reverse it. So vitamin K will be very high in my book, together with aspirin, because the vitamin K will have the the very anabolic effect. The aspirin will also, but they also tend to oppose each other's effects on the coagulation system. You take too much aspirin, you start bleeding too easily, right? You take too much vitamin K, it may shift you a little bit, too much into the direction of forming clots. It's not known to cause clots, as in like the dangerous ones that cause issues, but it is a clotting factor. So taking the two together not only gives you the benefits of both, but they also tend to cancel out each other's propensity for side effects.
Awesome. So I'm hearing glycine.
Yep. Imodin from Cascara, aspirin, vitamin K, and vitamin D.
Okay, and that, it seems also just like a big plug for all the quinones right there, right?
Yeah.
Am I correct in understanding that it's in the natural ones we've got Cascara, but also Pau d'Arco?
Yeah, Pau d'Arco has something called, there's a whole family of quinones known as lapachones.
Right.
And a few of them were actually used as cancer treatments in the 60s. And they were so successful that the pharmaceutical, they had actually cures of cancers in the 60s that even to this day are considered incurable, such as lung cancer and pancreatic. But they said, some of these people had vomiting as a side effect. Some of these people had rashes on their skin as a side effect. It's really toxic. We cannot continue. Google Lapachol, which is the actual alcohol of one of the quinones, and the Wikipedia page will actually give you a link to those studies, and you will see that they managed to cure some of those cancers, but the pharmaceutical industry quickly intervened and lobbied heavily that Lapachol was not to be used and not developed as a drug. But guess what? Behind the scenes, companies like Pfizer and some of their other nefarious buddies are now running human clinical trials with beta-lapachone, which is the principal quinone in Pau d'Arco, for treating pancreatic cancer. But you'll never see it as beta-lapachone. It has a technical name, a patented name that it came up with. It's a specific formulation, so they were able to patent it, and I'm sure they're going to sell for like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But at its core, it's nothing but a Pau d'Arco extract. It's the isolated quinone from Pau d'Arco. So we have Pau d'Arco, we have Imodin from Cascara, we have the tetracycline family of antibiotics, which are also quinones themselves. We have methylene blue, which is a quinone-like molecule. It withdraws electrons, right? And that's what its main function really is. That's its main effect. It regulates the redox balance, right? And we have vitamin K. And vitamin K is a type of naphthoquinone, right? And all of the quinones in Pau d'Arco are also naphthoquinones. Vitamin K is very structurally similar to the beta-lapachone. The only difference being that vitamin K is a 1,4 naphthoquinone, while the beta-lapachone is a 1,2 naphthoquinone, but still about the same effects, the same family of molecules.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was about to mention that I've actually made myself, cinchona bark.
Yes.
Doing research on quinine.
Quinine, yes. So quinine, the effects of quinine that I've been researching seem to be mostly related to its ability to very key things. Number one, deplete the levels of carnitine, the amino acid L-carnitine in the body. So it acts very similar to the drug mildronate. And we are actually going to test this in one of my studies. We're going to test quinine for cancer or diabetes or cardiovascular disease or any disease that I'm able to form an animal model of, and we'll see if quinine alone or together with aspirin is able to help. Also, quinine turns out to deplete the amino acid tryptophan in the body. The less tryptophan you have, the less serotonin you're able to synthesize. And if that wasn't sufficient of a benefit, turns out that quinine is also a serotonin receptor antagonist, specifically on the serotonin receptors 5-HT3 and 5-HT2. So really great molecule in my opinion. And they're saying the rumor is that the reason the British Empire was able to conquer all of those tropical countries was that precisely because of the quinine and the tonic water that they were drinking. Except that the concentration of quinine in the original tonic water was about 300 to 500 milligrams per liter. And these days, the FDA says, oh, quinine is a scary molecule. You cannot drink it at a concentration of more than 85 milligrams per liter. But there's an entire book written about the expansion of the British Empire, and the book thinks that it wasn't just malaria. There were a bunch of different diseases that were awaiting the hapless Brits when they were conquering these countries, and quinine seems to have been a panacea similar to aspirin, the fame that aspirin enjoys these days. But that's what they were using, and it's much more soluble in alcohol and water than aspirin, so they're able to drink it more. And of course, it became famous as gin and tonic, but it wasn't the gin. It was the tonic that allowed the British Empire to expand to the degree that it did.
Love it. Yeah, and in personal experience, I've taken Pau and tea. I've taken doxycycline. I drink a bunch of tonic water, and I definitely noticed a similarity in the effects. And it's a pleasant one for sure. Yeah. Georgi, I have taken more than enough of your time. So let's plug Idea Labs, right? Idealabs.dc. That's your website.
Idealabsdc.com.
dc.com. Gotcha. Yeah, you can find, to anybody listening, you can find some of these substances mentioned along with many other terrific, high quality cosmetic products.
Exactly. Yes, for external use, it's because of our license and the way we're bottling them in a university chemical lab. And basically, it's just a quirk in the legalese. If you want to sell them as dietary supplements, you need to basically hire, you need to rent a restaurant space, which now may be a good idea because there are a lot of them went bankrupt around me. So I may be able to do that. But until then, we're bottling them in a lab. So officially, they're with the legal statement, the legal label of cosmetics. So that's what we sell.
Fantastic. Yep. And I can recommend everything I've tried on there. Also, you're frequent on the Ray Peat forum at HADA.
Yep.
And you got your own website too, where you do a health studies digest, I think would be my best description of it. And it's
same thing as the Ray Peat forum, basically like the blog. I have a blog, right, which is linked to Twitter. So anything I post on the blog gets like a quick blurb of that gets posted on Twitter as soon as I post it on the blog. The blog is heydude.me, HAID as in dog, U, T as in Tom.me. And then I take those blurbs from the blog and I dump them on the forum as well. I used to be a lot more active on the forum in terms of discussions, but the forum grew tremendously, which is a good thing, right? I mean, when I started using the forum, it was 1,000, actually 700 people, and now it's 10,000. So wow. I just can't maintain the interaction that I used to have back in the day. I was interacting, answering literally every question I was getting, and at this point, they're becoming just way too many. I mean, I have a day job, I have a family, right? My wife will kill me if I don't pay enough attention to the family. So it's just what I can do. And maybe at this point, my time is also better used trying to expand the science behind the metabolic theory, right? So I still interact with the forum. It's just I try to generate more original research these days, and just not enough time in the day to answer everybody's questions. But as the volume of knowledge and the forum and the blog grow, to the person who has enough time and enough motivation, they should be able to get most of their questions answered. I mean, just so much information has been already generated that just searching for a keyword related to whatever you're interested in brings up. I mean, I've actually done this with lay people. I've asked them, go to this website and search for anything of interest, health related, and not a single one of them was able to came back with an empty result. They all got more than one, in most cases, more than one threads or blog posts or Twitter posts that answered, their questions, or at least had information that they could use to investigate further.
Fantastic. So I'll put a bunch of those links up when I put this on YouTube. And then what are the odds we're going to get a new Danny Roddy, Georgi Dinkov coming up soon?
I mean, it's on Friday, this Friday.
Friday. All right. Yeah, I'll be there.
Yes. Georgi, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Best.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.